My name is Christine Haughney Dare-Bryan, and I am an editor-at-large with Inc. magazine, and I am very excited to welcome you all to the Keeping Up with the Consumer, How to Optimize Your Supply Chain panel. And we have an amazing panel. I have been talking to the panelists for the last week, and they're great, and there's a lot we can all learn from them. I am starting to my left. Reid Jackson is Vice President of Business Development at GS1. And I'd like to say that GS1 kindly sponsored this panel for us. He leads the investigation of new technologies and opportunities to solve business challenges using GS1 standards. And for anyone who doesn't know what GS1 does, they're a nonprofit which develops standards for barcodes. He also hosts this great podcast called the Next Level Supply Chain Podcast.
Thank you for that.
And it's available everywhere. I was listening to it on my flight out. Next, we have Tiffanie Stanard, who is CEO and founder of Stimulus. And that's a venture-backed company that helps companies with their supply chain issues. Through her career, she's worked with brands like Microsoft, Salesforce, AT&T, and Intuit. And we, last but not least, have Felicia Viera, who is founder and president of Crafted Brands Company. This is something I'm going to give a little plug here for their mixers, and something that also helped us all survive the pandemic, alcohol. She's an incredibly accomplished business owner with an expertise in identifying product lines missing in the market. So it's great to have you all here. Thank you for having us. So let's go back. 3 years ago this month, we weren't thinking about supply chain in the same way as we were forced to. Can you just really take me through, like, looking back so we can kind of go to where we are today, just the kind of nadir of supply chain issues? And I'll start with you, Reid, on...
Yeah, so I think the low point that hit us with the supply chain is when we all experienced viewing where schools were dumping out milk, and when you went to the grocery store, there was no milk on the shelves.
Yeah.
And it's just this connection that people didn't know of beforehand. It's the same product, but it's two different markets to bring them into, and that's a supply chain issue.
Yes. Now, Felicia, tell me what was kind of the most challenging point? You had a product everybody wanted. They were home, like working full time, homeschooling, doing it all. What happened?
Well, fortunately but unfortunately, I have a product that people love to drink, and it's with cocktails. So during the pandemic, everybody wanted a cocktail, and we needed to meet the supplies of the demand. So it was really important for us to diversify where we were buying from. It was very difficult to just stick with one vendor. You always had to make sure that you had plenty of options available to supply all of your ingredients and bottles, labels, etc. So there was a whole bunch of items that we had to procure.
And there was one product you mentioned, is it like the neck of the bottles that you were trying to get from China?
Yeah, we actually, it's a great point. We have custom neck bands that come from China, and those custom neck bands were stuck out on a boat. So they were actually stuck in a container. So as I'm sure many of you saw, that the boats were stuck out. There was about 75 of them off the coast of Long Beach, and one of the containers had my neck bands in it. So unfortunately, we actually had to pivot very quickly and get the neck bands produced again, and then flew them over by air freight because we couldn't wait for them to get off the boats.
Wow, okay. Tiffanie, you were working with a whole bunch of clients, early days of the pandemic. What were you advising them on? What was going on?
Yeah, so you mentioned that no one was thinking about supply chain at that time. The people that was working in data, the tech, and the logistics side was thinking about what could happen even pre-pandemic, right?
Okay.
Because we were trying to get a lot of folks within supply chain and logistics to really update their technology or digital transformation, as we like to call it, and making sure that they understood who they were buying from, why they're buying from them, And we've been talking about that for years. And then when the pandemic hit, we was like, hey, we're here to help. So we work across industries, but we were working heavily with healthcare at that time. So we know it was PE issues and looking at hand sanitizer and things of that nature. And a lot of their ingredients they were getting from other countries or even just other cities that were not in their backyard. So we had to quickly give them different lists through our platform of, hey, here's an alcohol company now that can make sanitizer for you, right? Here's different PE companies that we can help you switch to that can help you sew real quick and put this together. So we already had all of that information, thankfully, on our platform. So we were able to really kind of add to their pipeline and say, hey, here's 2, 3, 4 other suppliers that you can work with. But don't just think about working with them now. Think about working with them going forward, because you should always have alternatives to your supply chain. You should at least have 3 to 5 companies that you want to work with. Yes, keep that loyalty, but understand stuff can happen.
Okay. One thing I should ask, and I'm sure many people in this audience have an opinion on, is it all better, or all the supply chain problems, are they gone? I'll start with you, Reid.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's definitely getting better. You know, we're always learning as we go along. But like Tiffanie was saying, I think before the pandemic, supply chains were really looked at as a cost center, right? And they were just, how do we just run the efficiency to the nth degree? And then we threw a stick into the machine, it broke, and then it's like, what are we gonna do? So having a backup to my backup to my backup. And so now when we talk about supply chains, you really have to bring in resiliency, okay? So it's not just how can I be efficient, how can I be resilient? What do I do? How can I pivot? And so you need visibility up the supply chain, down the supply chain as well, because it impacts all of us in so many different facets, we can't even think up all the variables. And I think the most important thing we were talking about earlier is a supply chain is not linear. It's a web.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a true web, and it's global.
So are things all fixed for your clients? Felicia, what do you think?
Yes, so for our clients, no. Is it better than it was 2 years ago? Yes. Can they breathe? Do they feel like they can breathe a little bit better? Yes. But as we look across the board, if you still walk into your neighborhood store and the shelves are empty, we're still having supply chain issues. So that's the same thing, unfortunately, with the stuff that they're buying. So they now have good alternatives that they can work with. So they're more, excited than they was in the first 2 years, 3 years, but they know they have to do better and have more visibility going forward. So now we're working with them on, hey, what local companies can you work with and buy from? Local could be in your backyard or at least 1 5 miles away. And then 2, what companies can we help pivot their product and services to be able to really fulfill the need going forward?
Okay. And Felicia, are you?
I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of what Reid said, just in the sense that if for anyone that has a small to medium-sized company, it's really important that you stay current along with like the large competitive companies. So diversification is very key in that. But also think about forecasting, planning, making sure you're well ahead of that, working with your customers, making sure you're well in advance. 2 years out, 1 year out, making sure but you also at the same time you can pivot on orders. So it's really important, because even though the pandemic is done, the supply chain is lifting, but at the same time everybody's in competition for the same goods. So it's really important that you have those relationships with your vendors and that you feel confident that you can supply those goods to the customers when they need them.
Tiffanie, you brought up a really interesting point I've been thinking about purchasing, that you really kind of have to think of supply chain from that initial product purchase. So how have you worked with your clients on getting their goods to them faster from that point?
Yeah, so the way we help our customers that are using our platform is really making sure that you're first looking at all the suppliers or all of the businesses within your supply chain, right? You meet amazing businesses every single day at events. They're on your customer list. They're on your marketing list. So start there first. So we help them look at their current relationships and who within that relationship can turn into a potential vendor for you. Or maybe you did a one-time purchase with a company 5 years ago, but they're now offering a product and service that you currently need. So we're able to convert that information on the Stimulus platform to say, hey, you made a one-time purchase, but they're actually offering something you need now. Let's switch them over to become a vendor. And then when you don't have a relationship that you're looking for, now we're looking outside of your network. Who's outside of your network that you can work with or compare and contrast with your current supply chain? So we allow for you to really focus on building out relationships. Like our motto is build better relationships. And then from there, you can compare and contrast and then look at who's buying this now, who's actually planning on buying this, and do it real time on one place.
Another point, just to follow up on that, you mentioned that I've been thinking about is how we build relationships, and how we often, the personal way we shop and the vendors we go to translates into how we are as entrepreneurs. You could just speak more to like getting out of that mindset.
Yeah. So I always say the way you personally buy is how you professionally buy. So by the show of hand, who buys from Starbucks? Who likes Starbucks? Okay. Who buys coffee from their local coffee shop? All right. So if you are a buyer for your organization or you own an organization, you would buy the same way. You're not only thinking about the big guys, but you're thinking about the smaller company shop that you know their names, you know their kids, you know their dogs, right? Because they bring their dogs to work. And we want to make sure that that's translating across the board, because if the opposite is happening, you're only thinking about the bigger guys, but you're not thinking about the smaller companies, the diverse companies that also need your money and need your purchasing as well. So we try to make sure that if you have maybe some bad buying habits when you're not thinking across the board of who you're spending with, whether it's sustainability, now in most cities you can't get, plastic bags. You have to use, bags with no handles and paper bags, with good and bad things sometimes. But making sure that you're looking across the board of who you're spending with. So we try to make sure that we're looking at all your habits across the board and see how we can help you change that on the platform.
Thank you. Reid, I want to pivot back now to inventory and how the kind of concept of inventory management has changed over the last few years. Like how should we think of it differently, and how do you approach it differently with the companies you work with?
Yeah, so right before the pandemic hit, I was actually in San Francisco at an AI conference with my team, and we were looking at a lot of new technology. And BOPIS, buy online, pick up in store, that was really a small thing back then, 3 years ago. Now it's mainstream. And the funny thing is we were talking to companies because we're always looking around the corner. What new technology is coming out? How can we better serve our clients and customers? And so we're investigating this, and people are dabbling with it. When you look at inventory for like a grocer, the grocery store, you don't realize, but the shopper is half employee. They're walking through the aisles, they're picking stuff out, they're doing self-checkout. Well, for grocery to move to buy online, pick up in store, you have to have a really good vision of your inventory.
Okay.
And think about that. How many people, I might get mint chocolate chip. Tiffanie, do you like mint chocolate? Felicia, do you want mint chocolate chip? 15 minutes later, it's been in my shopping cart, right? And now I'm like, yeah, I want to do it. Not available, right? So this is that view, and that's just one simple example. But we talked about the challenges, right? You didn't have your neck labels. Where can you go? What visibility into somebody else's inventory do you have? And how are we sharing that ubiquitously? So those are the things we're constantly working on with companies.
Okay. And going back, Tiffanie, for another thing you mentioned was how you're an entrepreneur and your relationships with your supply chain partners can get pretty tense. They can sometimes be your frenemies. Let's all be honest, So, how have you worked with companies on addressing that?
Yeah, so everyone's your frenemy in business, right? Some things you do well that they do not well, and vice versa. So throughout the pandemic, sometimes people had different products that other, hospitals or other customers in different industries needed. So we said, hey, sometimes you're kind of sharing, patients and different people that are going to your hospitals. How do we look at what they have where there may be another product you can offer them that they don't have, and vice versa. And that's across the board, whether it's services or products. It's making sure that, yes, they're your quote-unquote friendly, but you need to partner with them and work with them. We worked with a lot of CPG companies where some people were on the shelves, some people wasn't, but it was because of a manufacturing issue or one ingredient to their product wasn't available. So I'm like, this time, maybe do this contract to keep you in that store partner, with the frenemy that you have, but they can also offer you something in the future. And all you have to do is go do legal, get some NDAs and all of that to make sure that you still keep your competitive advantage when you're working with a competitor, but don't let you being out of something hurt you in the long run, because if you're out of business, then you don't have a frenemy anymore because you're out of business.
Now, I want to really pivot the conversation to solutions, because you've taught me all a lot about the solutions to this. Felicia, I would love to hear about some of the ways you've kind of gotten through the last couple of years, and what are some of the points you can give everyone in this room advice on how to survive if you're an entrepreneur, and what you've done.
Well, I think survival comes with diversification and planning. It's really important to be able to pivot as at any level. So it's really important to make sure you plan well and make sure that you can be able to make sure that the business itself can be flexible, and that you actually have enough vendors in play that you can make sure you will deliver on time. Our customers are the priority. Our customers should never see any trials or tribulations we have on the back end, never any issues. So we really make sure they understand that we can deliver on time and in full. And that is something that we're really proud of as a company, that we have our OTIF scores of 98% and higher, and it's because we have diversified our vendors. We can make sure we have enough buy power to fulfill those orders as we need. So it's very important for us for future customers. And then those customers go to other companies, and then they are our buyers, our future buyers. So we've been able to grow as an organization because we're able to fulfill our products and all the orders that we have.
What about also your relationships with manufacturing plants? Can you tell us more? Have you been able to prioritize your relationships, or how has that worked?
The relationship with any co-packer is very important. So the manufacturing is your number one relationship, pretty much. But we have several manufacturing plants we use throughout the country. So again, we don't rely just on one. We do have a main one, but at the same time, we do have other backups. Certain co-packers have minimum order quantities. So it depends on the MOQ of which customer or where you're going to produce at. So we have several customers like Williams-Sonoma that are more boutique, in the sense that we produce at a smaller co-packer. But then we have stuff like we do for Target stores at a larger co-packer. But be as it may, that is very important to have that relationship with the co-packer. And again, it comes down to forecasting, so they know what type of glass that you're going to be using and what's the information, what's inbound, all the materials, because it's all about planning and getting on the line and making sure that all of your materials are there on time. And so if you can do that, you're going to form a better relationship with that co-packer. You're going to be a reliable customer of theirs, and then you will be able to get priority on the line, which is a very nice thing. So when orders come down, you get priority as in manufacturing.
And just to follow on that, do you have a working number of, like, if a supplier can't come through, it's like, well, I have 4 backups or 3 backups. Like, what do you keep in your head, the back of your head? So
the magic number is usually about 3 to 5.
3 to 5.
And the reason is just you have your main supplier, you have a great relationship with them, but things happen. I mean, we've talked about that where, glass gets stuck out on a boat, or they can't manufacture it, or there's just a depletion somewhere. So you do need to have multiple relationships within the same type of product that you need.
And even if it's like private label versus like a retail sales, that would be kind of a 3 to 5 number, or?
Certainly. So it's either way. So
Okay.
we have, and that means a lot of people. So it's a lot of relationships. But the beautiful thing is that sometimes that same vendor could help you for your branded side and private label. So it's really to utilize them at, of who you have a great relationship, who can supply the goods, but at the same time, always diversifying within your buying power.
Okay. One thing that I learned from all of you in our pre-interviews was the value of networking. We think of networking for raising funds. We think of networking for getting that first pitch meeting. But I didn't realize how essential networking had become in just supply chain survival. do you want to speak to that? I'm going to have you all speak to it.
Well, I mean, think of it too. I mean, you're going to meet tons of people this weekend, and you're going to form relationships, and those people know other people as well and can make some great connections. When you are forming those relationships, and they can go with you long term, and when we meet people, especially within the supply chain and our customers, it's very important to continue just even the day out conversations. You're not going to just talk business all the time, because you form. I've worked with vendors for over 20 years, and it's important to make sure that you have those long-standing relationships, because you will get priority. You'll be able to get those favors, etc., and they'll be able to fulfill your orders.
And how do you advise your clients on this, Tiffanie, on the kind of the value of networking?
Yeah, so I remind them again what we talked about earlier of how you network personally is how you should network professionally, and just looking at all of the relationship that you have, all the relationships that you could have, and you never know when you're speaking to a potential business partner or vendor at an event that you're at, and just making sure that you're cultivating a relationship. So when you're buying personally, you buy from places that you trust, that you get recommendations from friends and family. It's the same thing. I just came back from a supply chain conference, and it kept saying, trust, trust, trust. I need to trust you. And unfortunately, sometimes with business relationships, they take about 12 to 24 months to trust you compared to personal when you're buying. Buying, like, as soon as your friend said, I loved it, buy it, you're buying it the next day, or deciding on buying it. Professionally is not the same thing. So they really do need to trust you, especially in the manufacturing side. They will stay with the same people for 20 plus years, which is a good thing for that relationship, but it can be a bad thing for a smaller company trying to get in, right? So we're trying to teach the value of trust and data, and giving people as much data as they can as possible, going back to the relationship to show them, hey, that supplier that you're considering that may be brand new, they have relationships with 20 other people that you know. So that's your initial trust to give them a chance.
Okay. And circling back, Reid, how can I think of GS1 as kind of helping me with networking and guiding if I'm looking for other suppliers?
Yeah, so we take a little bit different approach, right? Because we're a not-for-profit, net-neutral organization. And what we do is we bring industry together. So we support 20-plus industries: healthcare, grocery, retail, food service. And a lot of people don't realize there's a significant difference between food service and grocery. My first example of the milk, that's food service, right? That's going to a school, it's going to a restaurant, where grocery milk is going to a grocery store direct to consumer in that spot. So we bring industry together to talk about what works well. Where are our challenges? How are you using this new technology? Is this going to take something over? Or do we need to tweak or change? And then you have products that we all use, like aspirin or ibuprofen. You can get it at a bodega in New York City. You can get it at a grab-and-go store. You can get it at Target. You can get it at any major retailer, but you also get it at a hospital. Yeah. And it's a completely different supply chain. So we bring industry together to share best practices, talk about challenges, and talk about group solutions. So it can be the rising tide to lift all boats. Still enables you to have your secret sauce, right? Like some analytic software you want to use, or specific branding you want to do. But when you think about the supply chain, a lot of times you don't know. I reached out to Felicia, hey, can you get me this? And then Felicia says, sure, I got a guy, right? But we don't know who that is. No. But it could be a woman. It could be a bot. It could be so many things we don't know, but there comes that trust. But we start talking about, how can we do this with common language and common understanding? And I shared with you the very simple example of context. Everybody can speak English, right, as a common language, right, between here and England. But the context is this. If I write down 3/2/23, everybody from America says, okay, that's the 2nd of March. But everybody from England, it's the 3rd of February. It's still the same language, but the context is totally different. So we bring industry together, network, to understand what works in this country, what works in that country, so you can buy something and then universally use it around the globe.
Okay. Tiffanie, I want to go back to a point where you had mentioned before about leaning into kind of diversifying your thinking about supply chains, whether it's like women-owned businesses, or how have you like nurtured and encouraged your clients to just think differently when they're just banging their head against a wall trying to get a glass bottle to put their product in or something like that?
Yeah, so we use data. We try to take the quote-unquote thinking out the hands of the buyer sometimes, meaning we're just putting information in front of you and then allowing you to make a decision from there. Because sometimes our assumption is, hey, there may not be a woman-owned business that does this or a black-owned business that does this until we provide you with the data and show, no, there's about 30 of us that do this or 40 of us that do this. So now they're looking at the data and they can either themselves as the buyer make that decision, or they can give that information to the potential buyer to say, hey, we found 30 companies that are doing this, right? So we're giving them that data, as we say, that data-driven decision, and we hear it across the board, across different industries that say that, but we really say, no, here's the data for you to make a decision, because we're now putting that in front of you. So companies that are large, companies that are small, we're listing them alongside each other to say, hey, yeah, you are used to this large, big company that may have a little bit more money in the bank, but this company is 1 mile away, so not only you're helping your community, but you can also create jobs. 2, they're women-owned, so they're helping you with, your diversity goals. And 3, they're also sustainable, so now you're doing your ESG goals. So we just gave you 3 extra data points on this smaller company that's fitting with a bunch of goals that you have throughout your organization, not just one.
Okay. And Felicia, I want to go back. We'd just love to hear any of your words of wisdom of what products you thought would be impossible to get. We talked a lot about glass, the glass shortage right now in the world, but are there any examples you could kind of give the audience of just products, how you were able to get them and get through the supply chain?
Well, a few products for us specifically, like for juices, there is, we use tons of different juices. We have about 80 different formulas we do for customers, for private label and for branded. So we have a lot of juice in the queue. So we buy, again, forecasting a year out. So juice, though, at times does have a bad crop, and you have to be able to pivot. So we've been fortunate enough to be able to go and work with our customers and maybe redo a formula. But if, and that's in a rare case, but it's really important, again, to make sure you have 3 or 4 vendors that you can buy from the juice on. And then the other piece is paper.
Yes.
We've talked about paper, cardboard is very difficult to manage because it keeps going up. You would think that since the supply chain is lean again, or it's getting better, the paper pricing would go down. But things like labels and cardboard are unfortunately still continuing to rise. So it's difficult for that small to medium company to be competitive with companies like Amazon or Walmart that buy almost 90% of the boxes in the country of cardboard. So it's really important to make sure that you have several vendors that you work with and trying to keep costs as low, but sometimes you're stuck, and that's one piece that you don't have a lot of flexibility on. So you try and negotiate as much as you can on other supplies that you work with.
Thank you. Now, does anyone from the audience have some questions? We have a few minutes left and wanted to give anyone an opportunity to ask. Oh, yes.
In different industries, there's often suppliers that have a lot of power because they are the key suppliers. In those situations, how do you go about negotiating on price, capacity, especially as a smaller player?
So it's really important, especially as a small company or medium company, that you know exactly what you're going to need those supplies for and the quantities, but also looking in the future. So don't just talk about what you need right now, but also the possibility of what's going to be for the year out. So that will help you with negotiating, because we do a lot of forecasting every year, and it's really important for you to get your lowest costs available. So the pinpoint of negotiation is also showing them what type of business you're going to bring them long term, as opposed to just the immediate. So that way you can try and drive down the pricing and continue to do that year after year. As your quantities go up, you can go to market and talk to them about what you're seeing out there, but at the same time driving those costs down.
So that's a great response. Thank you. The follow-up question would be, how do you do your forecasting if you're a fast-growing startup and things are constantly changing month to month? In that situation, how do you go about committing, but also having the leeway to not commit in case, we're going through a recession, but
So and there's an ever-changing market. You're going to get customers that are going to say, hey, can you get me 50,000 units in 2 weeks? Really quickly. But you have to know your supply chain. You have to know your capacity and your ability to ramp up. You also need to know on the back end of what your suppliers can do and what you can commit to. So it's very important to constantly revisiting that forecast. So it's not just a year out. We are constantly going back and forth what our needs are and to make sure we have enough supplies to fulfill, because you don't want an order from a customer and then you can't fill, right? So, and you don't want to, you always want to try and say yes, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you can fulfill those orders because that's your reputation. So it's very important to make sure that you continue to have those relationships, but go back and always forecast as often as you need, especially when you have an influx of business, because you need all your team members in the business to make sure that it happen and they can fill on time.
Felicia, I think you made a good point of you need to know when to say no sometimes. And it goes back to Tiffany's point of building trust. So if you're planting these future relationships, hey, I would love to take your order right now, but if I said yes, that would be the wrong thing. You wouldn't get what you need and it would ruin my reputation. So I'm telling you no for these reasons and in the hope to build the trust.
Yeah.
We see a lot of startups do that and they chug along and then...
Right, and I want to add to that as well. I always say, like you say, they're like the big guys doing X, Y, and Z, and they kind of depend on smaller, suppliers, companies not knowing who other competitors of theirs are, right? So it's like I teach companies to do the research or do the research on our platform. Like, don't assume that they're the only in that space, because I promise you can find alternatives if you take the time to. Sometimes there may be 1 or 2 companies, but they go there with that knowledge of knowing that you didn't do the research, and then they're charging you accordingly. But if you're coming there and you say, you know what, I actually know the guy down the street does this, and this is how much it costs, they don't have a choice but to negotiate with you after that.
I can add one more thing too.
Yes.
I would also say transparency too with your customers, making sure they understand where you're at, and if you have transparency, customers really appreciate that.
Hi, good afternoon. First of all, thanks for the panel. My name is Thilo. I'm running a small electronics manufacturing company out of Austin, and we buy a bunch of electronics parts. Do you have any advice of buying your materials from manufacturers directly, or do you go through distributors sometimes? What is your experience with that? What do you prefer?
So I try and go as direct as I can because I get best pricing. So just a matter of the quantities of how many quantities that you need. And so it's important to say, again, with that forecasting and looking far out, what do I need? How much am I going to be bringing in? Can I store it? Do I have enough of room to do so? So it's really important to make sure that you can keep your costs low, so direct is always the best way possible. But again, I do understand, especially if there's a boutique, something specific that a customer needs or whatever, it needs to go through distribution. So because the distributing can fulfill smaller orders, but also can do it on a regular basis too. So it's just a matter of quantities.
Well, I want to thank you, Felicia, Tiffanie, and Reid. It's been wonderful, and you've taught me a lot. I mean, I feel like supply chain was something that was often overlooked to a fault a few years ago, and now it's kind of front and center of no matter what you do. And it's just been a pleasure to have you. So thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.